One thing that I love to do is to theory craft, right? It's one of my favorite things. Maybe it's the inner 3.5 and Pathfinder player in me, but I just love the creativity of coming up with cool and interesting character concepts. So I was looking at the Barbarian, and the Barbarian is one of those classes that is really geared in a very particular way. Even the mechanics of the class with Rage, everything in this class is really focused on kind of making very similar characters, right? Lots of strength, lots of constitution, lots of strength, lots of constitution, right? This has kind of been the MO for Barbarian. And I was thinking, what would happen if we flipped the script? What would happen if we just threw out the extra rage damage and we didn't worry about that, and we instead tried to make a dex-based Barbarian? What would it be good at? So what I'd like to present to you is the Naked Halfling Dex Barb Ultimate Tank build. Let's jump into this thing. All right, guys, before we jump into this thing, I want to say, yes, I am doing this in D&D Beyond. No, this is not a sponsored video. It's just my preferred tool whenever I do these ultimate builds. So right up here, we've got our Naked Halfling Dex Barbarian Tank right there for our character name. And let's jump over here to race. As you can imagine from the thumbnail, the title, the intro, and what I just talked about just now with the name, we are going to go with a Stout Halfling here. Now, I chose Stout Halfling a lot for the flavor. Yes, the attributes work in our advantage, but there are other races that you guys could choose with this pretty easily. Human Variant will give you the extra feat at the beginning. You know, Half-Orc's got some great things. Goliath has some great things here. But let's go ahead and jump, because we're going to be Dex build over with a Halfling. Before we slide over to class, let's jump over here to ability scores first. We're going to come down here for a point buy. Now, on the point buy, you get a couple different ways you can go about this. You can start off with 13 strength. We're going to slide down here and max out our Dex and Constitution, though. Those are really important. Our Wisdom, let's go ahead and at least get that to a 12, because that'll give us, help us a little bit with those will saves. So right here, you can just leave this at 13 strength if you want. That's the minimum necessary to make this build actually function with the multi-classing we're going to do. Or you can go ahead and crank it up. I'm just going to go ahead and crank it up 1. And remember, 8 intelligence and 8 charisma. That doesn't mean that you're stupid or that you're, an awful person to hang around. It just means that those aren't any of your strengths. Those are average scores. So we can see here we've got a total of a 14 strength. We have 16 dexterity. We have 16 constitution. So we've got those +3 modifiers in each of those categories. And then, of course, we got dumps in intelligence, charisma, and wisdom. We've got a little bit there to help us out with those will saves. Okay, let's jump over here into the classes, and we're going to select Barbarian at level 1. Now, what's interesting about this build is when everything is said and done by level 20, this build is actually going to be 9 levels of Barbarian and 11 levels of Fighter, but this is still a Barbarian build because the early parts of the game, the majority of the game, we're going to be playing this thing as a Barbarian focused build, and most of the engine to this class are going to be things that we pick up from Barbarian. So when we go ahead and take Barbarian at level 1, and then for the first 6 levels of the game, we are going to take Barbarian. Now, as is the case with most of these multi-class builds, a lot of times it's not about what all you can squeeze in with by the time you get to level 20, but more importantly, when you want to go ahead and take these multi-classing levels so that you don't miss out on things like extra attack or ability score improvements. All right, let's jump down here and grab a couple of proficiencies. I like perception here and athletics. It's not going to matter too much. Now, at level 1, we're going to get 2 abilities, range and unarmored defense. These are going to be the 2 big engines to this class. Now, here's something to take note of with rage is, yes, while you're raging, you're going to get that extra little damage, but that damage only takes place whenever using a melee attack using strength to gain that bonus damage. Now, for the most part, we're going to be using a finesse weapon. We are going to be using dexterity as our primary attacking modifier, so we're not going to be able to take advantage of this. However, there will be some instances when we are recklessly attacking later on, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about the strategy on when that might be appropriate, that you instead will be able to go ahead and grab that +2 damage or +3 damage whenever you are raging. But the most important part of the rage here is giving us resistance and giving us that half damage on bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. So that's going to be a big core mechanic of this class. Now, in addition to that, we have the next bit here, which is going to be our unarmored defense, which is basically saying while we're not wearing armor, our AC gets to add our Dex mod plus our Con mod, and then we can still gain that benefit whenever we use a shield. So at level 1, we're going to get our 2 big tank abilities here, in that we're going to add our constitution to all of our armor class, and we're going to, while we are raging and trying to tank and take on all the damage from our party to be a big sponge for it, we're going to take that half damage. So at level 1, we're going to jump in right away with being a pretty nasty little tank. At level 2, we're going to pick up Reckless Attack. Now, I will talk a little bit more about this. Again, something to take note of here is that Reckless Attack only works with weapon attacks using strength, so this will not work when you are using a finesse weapon if you are declaring that you're using your Dex mod to attack with that finesse weapon, and that's something that we will touch on a little bit later on. Also at level 2, we're going to pick up Danger Sense, and this is going to give us a bit of an edge here whenever we're making Dex saving throws against things like traps and spells. Okay, and then at 3rd level, this is where things start to get a little bit fun for us. So we're going to come down here and take Ancestral Guardian. Ancestral Guardian. Now, one thing I want to note about this build, and this is kind of really important to the whole overall theme of this build. When we were kind of going over this and coming up with interesting ways to make this particular build happen on being a Dex-based barbarian tank, there were about 10 ways to Sunday to make this thing deal out more damage. But every time we kind of thought about, hey, what would be some interesting ways that we could crank up damage, we realized that if we wanted to just throw damage, then we could have just made a strength-based barbarian taking all of those hits and recklessly attacking. He still would make for a fine health sponge tank, but that's not what we were going for here. What we wanted to do was make an ultimate tank that could help and aid the party to really lock the battlefield down, soak up a lot of damage, and have a lot of attacks miss them. So ultimately, we're going with Ancestral Guardians. Now, a couple of quick things. Zealot, of course, will help you pump out some extra damage. An interesting one that we looked at was also the Totem Warrior, the Totem of the Wolf, which will give all of our allies advantage whenever they're standing next to that. And then, mixing in something like a Battle Master to use commanding strikes and stuff like that. So there are some interesting ways to increase damage there. But ultimately, with our key focus on this build, we want to just be the best possible tank that we can be. Okay, so at level 3, we're going to pick up Ancestral Protectors. Now, this is a really, really awesome ability that allows us on the first creature that we hit with an attack on our turn, they become the target of our spirit ancestors here. And what those ancestors will do is that they will, in turn, hinder and give disadvantage to that foe for 1 round on any other target that isn't yourself. Now, here's a cool thing about this, is that in addition to giving them disadvantage, even if they do choose to attack an ally, for instance, at disadvantage, if they manage to hit, your ally is still going to have resistance to that damage being dealt to them. So they're going to attack at disadvantage, and if they hit, our allies now have resistance to that attack. So this is going to be a pretty significant tank ability here once we start pulling this thing out at level 3. At level 4, we're going to pick up our ASI. Now, for our first ASI, this is something that you kind of have a few different choices on. I am actually choosing to take a feat here instead of just increasing my dexterity or increasing my constitution. Because what I want to do with this feat is I want to go ahead and take Sentinel. Now, it is completely plausible for you to take Sentinel later on in the game. So if you wanted to go ahead and take dexterity now to increase your 2-hit chance and to increase your initiative rolls and to increase your dex saves and to increase your AC, you can do that. I'm going to go ahead and take Sentinel here. Now, one reason that I want to take Sentinel here is that this will help us lock down the battlefield. So whenever you hit a creature with an opportunity attack, that creature's speed becomes 0 for the rest of the turn. So this will help us once we kind of get set up in front of our allies. This will help us kind of lock down the battlefield so that people aren't moving out of our threatened range and trying to attack our softer, squishier targets in the back. And then, of course, whenever a creature within 5 feet of you makes an attack against anybody else other than yourself, you can then use your reaction to get an extra melee attack on that creature. The extra damage we're going to be dealing with this build isn't a whole lot, so this is kind of a nice to have. One thing about this build, it is going to use reactions all over the place, which is one of the reasons why I really like it as a tank. Sometimes as a tank, you kind of feel, okay, I'm up here, I'm taking damage, but this is a very active tanking build, and there are a lot of different things that you're going to be using those reactions to do to help your allies in combat. So I'm going to go ahead and take Sentinel here, and let's move on to level 5. We're going to pick up extra attack and fast movement. Again, if you're a human and you already had 30 movement speed, this is going to crank you up to 40. With our halfling, this is going to take us up from 25 feet of movement to 35 feet of movement, so that's kind of nice. And then finally, at level 6, we're going to pick up Spirit Shield. This is another thing that we can be doing with our reaction. So this is a really fantastic tanking ability, and what's cool about it is that while you're raging, any other creature that you see, as long as they're within 30 feet of you, whenever they take damage, you can just use your reaction to reduce that damage by 2d6. Now, some key things to note is that it does not matter what the source is of this damage. So lightning bolts, traps, arrows, whatever. You don't have to be next to whoever is causing that attack, nor do you have to be next to the person taking the damage. As long as you're raging, whenever they take damage, you can use your reaction to reduce that damage by 2d6. So a pretty powerful little ability here, especially earlier in the game. And by the way, another key point here is that it doesn't have a cap on how many times we can do this. So theoretically, if we have 4 rages per day, we could use this ability 40 times with our reaction. If there's that much damage going on to your allies, you could, in essence, with 4 full rages, go all the way up to 80d6 in damage reduction. Is it going to happen? Very, very, very unlikely. Is it possible? Absolutely. So this is another thing that I really like about Spirit Shield, is that it doesn't have a cap on how often we get to use it. Okay, now that we got our 6 levels in Barbarian, let's go ahead and add another class. We're going to come down here and grab the Fighter. This is one of the main reasons, because we're multi-classing, that we needed a minimum of 13 strength in order to do this. So let's go ahead and add that Fighter now. Okay, now that we have our Fighter at level 1, what we're going to do here, and I kind of want to take you guys through this, is we're going to take Fighter for the next 11 levels in the game. So from here on out, we're going to go really focused in Fighter while still having those kind of Barbarian early mechanics to our engine. At level 1, we're going to pick up a fighting style. Of course, we're going to come down here and grab protection. Now, protection, you've got to have a shield, and what this lets you do is that whenever a creature you see attacks a target other than you within 5 feet, you can use your reaction to impose disadvantage on the attack roll. You must be wearing a shield. So again, this is something that will continue to play in with us using all of those reactions. We got more reactions that we can use to pick and choose to help our allies in combat. Also, we're going to pick up Second Wind. This is a little nice to have. It's not going to be a whole lot for us here, but it is going to give us a little bit of extra boost to our health to help us take up and soak up all that damage. And now the fun bits. Action Surge, we're only going to get 1 use of this for the entire build, but that's kind of nice to have at level 2. And then finally at level 3 for our Fighter, level 9 overall, we're going to pick up our martial archetype, our next archetype here. And again, some of the things that we looked at here, there's lots of different ways to increase the damage, but ultimately what our focus is on is just purely tanking and locking people down from hurting our allies. So Cavalier is going to be our archetype of choice, if you will. All right, so first up, we're going to get a bonus proficiency. Let's go ahead and I'm going to just grab Insight there. Born to Saddle is kind of a nice little ability, but in most games, it's probably not going to matter if you don't have a character that is mounted all the time. Now we're going to get Unwavering Mark. So this is really interesting here, and I want to kind of look at the differences here between Ancestral Protectors and Unwavering Mark. So Unwavering Mark works very, very similar to our Barbarian ability, Ancestral Protectors, but it has a few key differences. So the first up is that whenever you hit a creature with a melee attack, you can mark that creature to the end of your next turn, and while that creature is within 5 feet of you, a creature that is marked has disadvantage on any attack that doesn't target you. So very, very similar to what we saw with Ancestral Protectors, though a couple of key differences here is that this just says whenever you hit a creature, not the first creature you hit, and that creature has to be within 5 feet of you. In addition, any damage that's done, you can then make a special melee attack against the marked creature as a bonus action. So kind of a little bit like Sentinel, what that's already giving us here. And this is the last little bit to take note of, is regardless of the number of creatures you mark, you can make this special attack a number of times equal to your strength modifier. This is one of the reasons that we actually crank that strength up to a full 14 instead of 13, is to go ahead and get another use of Unwavering Mark. So bottom line, if you are raging, Ancestral Protectors is going to be your go-to, right? You're not going to want to use Unwavering Mark if you have Ancestral Protectors, because yes, while you're still granting disadvantage, it's very similar. If that creature moves away from you, Ancestral Protector still works. And if they do hit a target, that creature is going to have resistance to it. But it's nice to have Unwavering Mark kind of as a backup for a couple of reasons. One, if you have two foes that have surrounded an ally, you can now move up with extra attack, hit the first one, proc Ancestral Protectors to give that creature disadvantage against your ally, and then with the second attack from your extra attack, use Unwavering Mark on the second one. So you can give disadvantage to both of those combatants against an ally. So if a cleric gets kind of ganged up on, you can move over very quickly, and you have the option to do both of these. Another thing is that if for some reason you are out of rages, because Ancestral Protectors will only work while you're in rage, then of course you've still got a couple of Unwavering Marks. Again, 2 is not a lot, but it does give you a little bit more flexibility. Okay, and by level 10, we're going to pick up our next ASI. At this point, you can go Constitution or Dexterity. I'm going to prefer Dexterity here for a couple of reasons. Because one, I like the bonus that it gives versus the life that Constitution would give to Initiative. The second thing is, of course, it's going to help us land those attacks a little bit easier while we are using our Finesse weapon and deal out a little bit extra damage here. So I like Dex here. You can do whatever you want. And of course, at this point, at level 10, we're going to also, remember, we're going to be cranking up our AC. So at level 10, we're going to have a 19 AC, and while raging, still taking half damage. At level 11, we're going to get extra attack. This isn't going to matter because of the way that multiclassing works. And at level 12, we're going to get another ASI from Fighter, kind of catching us up, if you will. And I'm going to go ahead down here and max out that 20 to give us a +5 on our to hit bonus and finesse damage, and getting our AC up to a whopping 20 points, again, while raging, taking half damage from non-magical sources. Now, at 13th level, we get a fantastic tanking ability called Warding Maneuver. What this does is whenever a creature within 5 feet of us gets hit by an attack, we get to roll a 1d8 as our reaction, and then just add that to the AC. The cool part is if the attack would still hit that person, even with that extra bonus to the AC, the target now has resistance to that attack's damage. And of course, we get to use this a number of times per day equal to your Constitution modifier. So this will also continue to stack. So if we're raging and we have Ancestral Protectors and we've already imposed disadvantage, even if they do attack a foe with disadvantage, now we can use our reaction to add 1d8 to that armor class on top of having disadvantage. So you can start to see that whenever it comes to locking people down from hurting our allies, this build is really, really, really starting to shine. By 14th level, we're going to pick up another ASI, and at this point, you guys have a pretty good idea where this is going. We're going to start cranking up that Constitution, and so now we're going to go ahead and move into a 21 armor class while we are locking down the battlefield. The next level, we're going to get Indomitable. This is going to let us re-roll a failed saving throw. Again, this will still work with the Halfling's Lucky Feat. And then by 16th level, we are going to get Hold the Line. So Hold the Line is like a better version of Sentinel in the fact that where Sentinel, they would have to provoke an attack of opportunity. This will help making provoking that provoking an attack of opportunity a little bit easier, and it is also going to reduce the speed down to 0. Now, you could, in theory, say because you're going to get Hold the Line that you don't want to take Sentinel earlier in the game. The reason I wanted to do it with this build is just because of how late in the game Hold the Line actually comes. You know, you're not getting this until level 16, and a lot of games are well over before that point. So I still like taking Sentinel earlier, but Hold the Line is a nice little pickup here late game. And finally, down here at level 17, we're going to pick up Extra Attack. This says the feature could be affected by multiclassing, which is only half true. We are, in fact, going to get that third attack in a round at level 17. So now that we have our Barbarian 6, Fighter 11, we can go ahead and finish out our character with the last 3 levels in Barbarian. Let's go ahead and do that down here. We're going to grab, the next level we're going to get is Feral Instinct. This is just a nice little pickup, giving us advantage on those initiative rolls. And then at level 19, we're going to grab our last ASI. You know exactly where this is going. This is going into Constitution. And so at level 19, we are going to have our 22 AC while taking half damage when raging from non-magical sources. And finally, the last thing that we're going to get here at level 20 is Brutal Critical, which is a nice pickup, but not the most important, more important ability that we are going to pick up. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons I like this build is because this is what I call active tanking. In the fact that you're not just standing up there being a big target and making it hard for people to get past you, but you have a lot of flexibility and a lot of different abilities to use to protect and tank for your particular group. And so just to kind of quickly run down some of the reactions we have, we've got the fighting style protection with our shield. Of course, we have Sentinel, which will help us use our reactions to lock down the battlefield and get extra attacks. We've got Spirit Shield so that we can reactively use that 2d6 to lower damage dealt to our allies. We have Unwavering Mark, we have Warding Maneuver, which is another reaction, and of course we have Hold the Line, which is yet another sort of reactionary attack to lock the field down. So that is a lot of reactions, a lot of different options for us to use while we're tanking. And I think it's an interesting play style, because typically whenever you're thinking about building a class for offense, you're looking at all the different abilities that you get to use to be offensive, right? Extra spell slots and key points and all those things. And with this build, I really like all the abilities you pick up, not to be offensive, but they are active abilities that you need to kind of use and conserve and use at the right times and save your reactions for the right moments to actively tank for your party. So kind of an interesting twist here. So now what I want to know is how you would build a Dex-based Barbarian. Would you go the tank route like with what we did here? Would you do something like what we mentioned earlier with Battle Master and Totem of the Wolf? Or would you do something different like Path of the Zealot mixed with the Champion so you got that extra damage dice and increased crit range? Or would you mix things up and throw out Fighter altogether and maybe do something like Barbarian Rogue and try to get that extra sneak attack damage? I'd love to know what you would do if you were building a Dex-based Barbarian, whether it's a tank or not. I want to give a huge shout out to all of the kick-ass patrons over at welcomeadventures.com. Guys, it's because of you that I can keep doing this and making videos and making more content like this, and I love doing it. So if you like this content, you want to see more stuff like this while grabbing some extra rewards for yourself, playing in a game with me, jumping in our monthly hangouts, grabbing some extra maps, whatever, welcomeadventures.com, even $1 or $2 is a great way to support the channel. If this is your first time here and you love role-playing games as much as I do, I'd love to have you subscribe. Every week I put out new videos on GM tips, player tips, tutorials, and more. So if this sounds like something you might be interested in, just hit that subscribe button right there down below and come join us. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Cody, and may your games be filled with awesome memories and even better friends. I'll catch you guys next time.
Yeah.